What happens when royal privilege meets hard journalism? In just 38 seconds, a carefully crafted public image began to crumble on live television. This is the story of how one comment ignited a firestorm that nobody saw coming. The studio lights were bright that evening. Anderson Cooper sat across from his guest, ready for what everyone thought would be another polished interview. The cameras were rolling, the audience was watching. Nobody knew they were about to witness television history. Anderson started with a simple question. Professional, direct, the kind of question any journalist would ask. He leaned forward slightly, his expression neutral but focused. "Let me ask you about the recent charitable initiative you launched," Anderson said, his voice steady and calm. "There have been some questions raised about where the donations are actually going. Can you walk us through the financial breakdown?" It was a fair question, a reasonable question, the kind that any public figure should expect when they launch a major charitable campaign. But the response? Nobody was prepared for what came next. Meghan shifted in her seat. Her smile, which had been warm and practiced just moments before, suddenly vanished. Her eyes narrowed. There was a pause. A long, uncomfortable pause that seemed to stretch forever. "I find it really interesting," she began, her voice taking on a sharp edge, "that you would ask me that question. You know, Anderson, I expected better from you. I really did." Anderson remained composed. He did not flinch. He did not react. This was his arena. He had interviewed presidents, dictators, disaster survivors. He knew how to handle difficult moments. "It is a legitimate question," Anderson responded calmly. "Many of your supporters have been asking for transparency. I'm simply giving you the platform to provide that transparency." But Meghan was not interested in transparency. Not right now. She leaned back, crossing her arms. Her body language spoke volumes before her words even came out. "You know what your problem is?" she asked, her tone dripping with condescension. "Your problem is that you cannot stand to see someone like me succeed. You cannot stand to see someone who has overcome so much, who has faced so much adversity, actually make a difference in the world." The audience stirred. You could feel the tension building. Anderson maintained his professional demeanor, but there was a flicker in his eyes. He had not come here to be attacked. He had come here to do his job. "With all due respect," Anderson said, his voice still measured, "this has nothing to do with your success or your background. This has to do with accountability. When you ask the public for money, they have a right to know how that money is being spent." Meghan laughed. It was not a genuine laugh. It was bitter, sharp, cutting. The kind of laugh that makes everyone in the room uncomfortable. "Accountability," she repeated, as if the word itself was offensive. "You want to talk to me about accountability? Where was your accountability when you reported false stories about me for years? Where was your accountability then?" Anderson sat up straighter. His patience, legendary in the industry, was beginning to show its limits. "I have never reported a false story about you," he said firmly. "And I resent the implication that I have. Every story we run goes through rigorous fact-checking, every single one." But Meghan was not listening. She was on a roll now. The facade of the polished public figure was cracking, revealing something else underneath. Something angry, something defensive. "Oh, please," she scoffed. "Do not sit there and pretend like you are some bastion of journalistic integrity. You are just like all the rest of them. You build people up just so you can tear them down." The audience was completely silent now. This was not the interview anyone had expected. This was something else entirely. Something raw and uncomfortable and impossible to look away from. Anderson took a breath. When he spoke again, his voice was ice cold. Professional, but unmistakably firm. "I am going to ask you one more time," he said. "Can you provide documentation showing where the charitable donations have gone? Yes or no?" Meghan stood up. Actually stood up. In the middle of a live television interview, the audience gasped. This was unprecedented. "I do not have to sit here and be interrogated like some criminal," she declared, her voice rising. "I came here in good faith, thinking we would have an actual conversation, but clearly you just want to ambush me." Anderson remained seated. He looked directly at her, his expression unreadable. "Nobody is ambushing you," he said quietly. "I asked you a straightforward question about public donations. That is not an ambush. That is journalism." Meghan pointed her finger at him, actually pointed at him like she was scolding a child. "You know what?" she said, her voice shaking with anger. "You are exactly what is wrong with the media today. You people think you can just attack anyone you want, ask whatever invasive questions you want, and hide behind the word journalism. Anderson finally showed emotion. Not anger, but something close to disappointment. Asking about financial transparency for a charitable organization is not an attack, he said. It is basic due diligence, and the fact that you are reacting this way instead of simply answering the question speaks volumes. That was it. That was the moment everything exploded. Speaks volumes, Meghan shouted. Actually shouted, "How dare you? How dare you sit there in your comfortable chair with your comfortable life and judge me? You have no idea what I have been through. You have no idea the sacrifices I have made." Anderson stood up now too. Not aggressively, but definitively. He had reached his limit. "I think we need to take a break," he said, looking directly at the camera, then back at Meghan. "Actually, I think we need to end this interview." Meghan's eyes went wide. "Excuse me?" "I'm ending this interview," Anderson repeated, his voice calm but absolute. "I invited you here to have an honest conversation. Instead, you have turned this into a personal attack. I will not tolerate that. Not on my show." Meghan stared at him in disbelief. For a moment, she seemed genuinely shocked that someone had stood up to her. "You cannot just kick me off your show," she said, but her voice had lost some of its edge. Uncertainty crept in. "Actually," Anderson said, "I can. This is my show, and I decide who sits in that chair. Right now, I am deciding that you need to leave." The audience was frozen. Cameras continued rolling. This was live television at its most raw, most real, most unscripted. Meghan tried one more time. Her voice took on a pleading quality now, mixed with indignation. "This is unbelievable," she said. "This is absolutely unbelievable. You invite me on your show, you attack me with hostile questions, and then you throw me out? Do you have any idea how this looks?" Anderson picked up his notes from the desk. The gesture was casual, but the message was clear. This was over. "I know exactly how this looks," he said. "It looks like a journalist asked a reasonable question and the guest responded with hostility and personal attacks instead of answering. It looks like I maintained my professionalism while you lost yours." The words hung in the air, devastating, precise, undeniable. Meghan opened her mouth to respond, but nothing came out. For the first time in the entire exchange, she seemed to realize that she had gone too far, that she had miscalculated badly. Anderson turned to someone off camera. "Can we please have someone escort our guest out?" His tone was polite but firm. This was not a request. It was an instruction. A producer appeared from the side of the stage. Meghan looked at Anderson one more time, as if hoping he would change his mind. He did not. His expression remained unchanged. Resolved. "This is not over," Meghan said, her voice low and threatening. "You have not heard the last of this." Anderson looked at her directly. His response was measured, calm, and absolutely final. "Actually," he said, "it is over, at least for tonight. Goodbye." The producer gently touched Meghan's elbow, guiding her toward the exit. For a moment, it looked like she might resist, might cause an even bigger scene. But something in Anderson's expression, something in the absolute stillness of the studio, made her think better of it. She walked off the set. Her heels clicked loudly in the silence. Every step echoed through the studio. The audience watched in stunned silence. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Anderson stood there for a moment, collecting himself. Then he turned to the camera. When he spoke, his voice was steady, professional, as if the last 10 minutes had not just happened. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, "I apologize for what you just witnessed. That was not the conversation I had hoped to have tonight. But I will not compromise the integrity of this program by allowing personal attacks to replace honest dialogue." He paused, looking directly into the camera lens. When public figures ask for public support, they open themselves to public scrutiny. That is not an attack. That is not bullying. That is accountability. And it is something I will never apologize for asking about. The audience began to applaud. Slowly, at first, then building. By the time Anderson finished his statement, the entire studio was on their feet. But here is the thing. Here is what made this moment so significant. Anderson did not celebrate. He did not smile or acknowledge the applause. He simply nodded once, professionally, and looked at his notes. Because this was not about winning. This was not about scoring points or getting viral moments. This was about maintaining standards, about refusing to let entitlement trump accountability. Backstage, you could hear the commotion. Meghan was reportedly furious, demanding to speak with producers, threatening legal action, insisting that the footage not be aired. But it was live television. The footage was already out there. The moment was already captured. Anderson continued with the rest of his show. He brought on his next guest. He conducted the interview with the same professionalism he always showed. But everyone watching knew what they had just witnessed. They knew they had seen something rare. They had seen a master journalist refuse to be bullied. They had seen someone in power be held accountable, even when they did not want to be. They had seen what happens when privilege meets principle and privilege loses. The whole exchange, from the first question to Meghan walking off the set, lasted less than 12 minutes. 12 minutes that felt like an hour. 12 minutes that would be replayed and analyzed for days to come. Think about what happened here. Anderson asked about charitable donations. A simple question. A necessary question, the kind of question that protects donors and ensures transparency. And instead of answering, instead of providing the documentation that any legitimate charity would have ready, Meghan attacked. She made it personal. She accused Anderson of jealousy, of bias, of being part of some media conspiracy against her. She pointed fingers. She raised her voice. She stood up in the middle of an interview as if the rules that apply to everyone else somehow did not apply to her. And Anderson? He remained calm. He remained professional. He asked the question again. And when it became clear that he would not get an answer, when it became clear that the interview had descended into something else entirely, he made the call. He ended it. That takes courage. That takes conviction. In an industry where ratings often trump integrity, where viral moments are valued over substantive journalism, Anderson made the harder choice. He chose accountability over entertainment. The moment Meghan walked off that stage, everything changed. The carefully constructed narrative she had been building, the image of the perpetual victim who could do no wrong, it cracked. Because you cannot claim to be above scrutiny and then melt down when someone actually scrutinizes you. You cannot ask people to donate money to your cause and then act offended when someone asks where that money is going. You cannot claim to value honesty and transparency and then refuse to be honest or transparent yourself. The audience in that studio understood it. The viewers at home understood it. And somewhere deep down, Meghan probably understood it too. She had overplayed her hand. She had assumed that her status, her celebrity, her carefully cultivated victim narrative would protect her from basic accountability. It did not. Anderson Cooper, with his gray hair and measured tone, with his decades of experience covering wars and disasters and political upheaval, was not going to be intimidated. He was not going to back down. He was not going to let someone turn his show into a platform for unsubstantiated attacks and deflection. The way he stood up, the way he looked at her and said it was over, the way he maintained his composure even as she was losing hers completely, that is what real professionalism looks like. That is what integrity looks like. That is what journalism is supposed to be. It is not about gotcha moments. It is not about destroying people. It is about asking the questions that need to be asked and not accepting deflection or hostility as an answer. When Meghan accused Anderson of being what is wrong with the media, she revealed something profound. She revealed that, in her mind, the media's job is not to ask tough questions. It is to accept her narrative unchallenged, to nod along, to provide a platform without providing scrutiny. But that is not journalism. That is public relations. And Anderson Cooper is not a publicist. He is a journalist, a real one, the kind who understands that his job is to serve the public interest, not to serve the interest of his guests. The 36 seconds it took for this to unravel, from that first question to the moment the tension became palpable, that was all it took for the mask to slip. 36 seconds for years of carefully managed image to crack. Because here is the truth that no amount of public relations can hide. If you have nothing to hide, you answer the question. If your charitable organization is legitimate, you provide the documentation. If you truly believe in transparency, you embrace scrutiny rather than attacking the person doing the scrutinizing. Meghan did none of those things. Instead, she deflected. She attacked. She tried to make herself the victim once. Again. But this time, it did not work. This time, she was sitting across from someone who had seen every tactic in the book, who had interviewed everyone from presidents to warlords, and who was not impressed by celebrity or status. The silence in that studio after she left, that was telling. Nobody rushed to her defense. Nobody questioned Anderson's decision. The audience knew what they had seen. They had seen entitlement meet accountability, and they had seen accountability win. When Anderson addressed the camera after she left, when he explained his decision to end the interview, he did not gloat. He did not celebrate. He simply stated the facts. He had asked a legitimate question. She had responded with hostility. He had maintained professional standards. That is leadership. That is what it looks like when someone refuses to be bullied or manipulated. When they stand by their principles, even when it would be easier to just move on, to smooth things over, to avoid the confrontation. Anderson could have backed off. He could have said it was fine, that they did not need to get into the details right now, that maybe they could talk about something else, but he did not. He stood his ground. He asked the question that needed to be asked, and when he did not get an answer, he did not pretend it was okay. The way Meghan pointed her finger at him, like he was some subordinate who needed to be put in his place, that revealed so much about how she views the world. She genuinely seemed to believe that asking about charitable finances was an attack, that holding her accountable was some form of persecution. But accountability is not persecution. Scrutiny is not bullying. Questions are not attacks. These are fundamental concepts that anyone in the public eye needs to understand. And if they cannot understand them, if they cannot accept them, then maybe they should not be in the public eye at all. The standing ovation that Anderson received from the passive audience, that was not just for him. That was for everyone who has ever been shouted down for asking reasonable questions. For everyone who has been accused of bias or conspiracy simply for doing their job. For everyone who has maintained their integrity even when it was difficult. And the way Anderson received that applause, with a simple nod and then moving on to the next segment that told you everything you need to know about him, he was not doing this for applause. He was doing it because it was right. In a world where celebrities often get a pass, where famous people can deflect and distract and attack anyone who questions them, this moment stood out. This was someone saying enough. This was someone drawing a line and refusing to let it be crossed. The fact that Meghan threatened that this was not over, that Anderson had not heard the last of it, that just reinforced how out of touch she was. Because from the outside looking in, it was very clear who came out of that exchange looking good and who did not. Anderson came out looking like a professional who asked hard questions and maintained his standards. Meghan came out looking like someone who melts down when faced with basic accountability. That is not a narrative any amount of damage control can fix. The clicking of her heels as she walked off that set, echoing through the silent studio, that sound became symbolic. It was the sound of someone who came in expecting deference and left having received accountability instead. Think about all the interviews that happen every day. Think about all the times people dodge questions, change the subject, or give vague non-answers. And think about how rarely those people face any consequences for it. How rarely someone just says, "No, this is not good enough. We need real answers." That is what made this moment so powerful. Anderson did not just let it slide. He did not just move on to an easier topic. He held firm. And when it became clear that he would not get a real answer, he ended the interview rather than pretend everything was fine. That sends a message. It sends a message to every other public figure who thinks they can dodge accountability. It sends a message to other journalists that it is okay to hold the line. And it sends a message to the public that they deserve better than spin and deflection. The whole thing could have been avoided so easily. All Meghan had to do was answer the question, show the financial records, demonstrate that the charitable donations were going where they were supposed to go. That is it. That is all it would have taken. But she could not do it, or would not do it. And that refusal, combined with the hostility and the personal attacks, told a story that no public relations team could spin away. When Anderson said that her reaction spoke volumes, he was absolutely right. Because if you have nothing to hide, you do not react that way. If your organization is legitimate, you welcome the scrutiny. You provide the documentation happily. You use it as an opportunity to show how transparent and accountable you are. But that is not what happened. Instead, we got deflection. We got hostility. We got accusations of bias and conspiracy. We got everything except an actual answer to the actual question. And in the end, we got a dramatic exit. We got someone walking off a set, convinced they had been wronged, when in reality, they had simply been asked to be accountable for their actions. That is the story. That is what happened when privilege met principle on live television. That is what it looks like when someone who is used to getting their way suddenly does not. That is what it looks like when accountability wins. 36 seconds. That is all it took. 36 seconds from a simple question to a complete meltdown. 36 seconds that revealed everything anyone needed to know about how someone handles scrutiny. And in those 36 seconds, Anderson Cooper showed the world what real journalism looks like. Not journalism that tears people down for sport, not journalism that sensationalizes or exaggerates, but journalism that asks the questions that need to be asked and does not back down when those questions become inconvenient. That is the kind of journalism we need. That is the kind of accountability we deserve. And that is exactly what happened on that stage, under those bright lights, in front of those cameras. It was just one interview, just one exchange, just 12 minutes of television. But sometimes that is all it takes to reveal the truth. And sometimes the truth is as simple as this. When you ask for public support, you open yourself to public scrutiny. And if you cannot handle that scrutiny, maybe you should reconsider your position in the public eye. Anderson Cooper understood that. The audience understood that. The viewers at home understood that. And somewhere, deep down, even Meghan Markle probably understood that too, even if she would never admit it. Let us go back to that moment, that crucial moment when everything shifted. When Anderson asked his question and Meghan's entire demeanor changed. You could see it in her face. The smile froze. The eyes hardened. The body language became defensive. It was like watching someone realize they had walked into something they were not prepared for. She had come expecting softball questions. But Anderson Cooper is not that kind of host. He never has been. When Meghan said she found it interesting that he would ask that question, that was her first mistake. Instead of just answering, she immediately went on the attack. She made it about him instead of about the facts. That is classic deflection. And Anderson, to his credit, did not take the bait. He simply restated that it was a legitimate question. He maintained his composure. He stayed professional. Then came the accusation that Anderson could not stand to see her succeed. That was when the audience really started to sense something was off, because it was such a disproportionate response to such a simple question. You do not react that way to a normal question unless you have something to hide. The audience could see that. Anderson could see that. Everyone watching could see that. When Anderson brought it back to accountability, he was giving her another chance, another opportunity to just answer the question, to provide the information, to move forward. But she did not take it. Instead, she laughed, that bitter laugh. She made it about everything except the actual question he had asked. That is when Anderson started to show the first signs of losing patience. You could hear it in his voice when he said he had never reported a false story about her. When he said he resented the implication. That was his line. His professional integrity was not something he would let be questioned. He would remain calm in the face of deflection and hostility. But he would not sit there and let someone accuse him of spreading lies. The moment Anderson asked the question one more time, giving her that final chance, you could feel the weight of it. This was the moment where she could either answer or not, where she could either engage in good faith or continue down this destructive path. She chose to stand up. She chose confrontation. She chose to position herself as the victim rather than as a guest who had been asked a fair question. The gasps from the audience were genuine, because you do not do that. You do not stand up in the middle of a live interview like that. It is theatrical. It is manipulative. But Anderson did not take the bait. He stayed seated. He stayed calm. He simply stated that nobody was interrogating her like a criminal, that this was journalism. The finger-pointing moment. That was something else, the audacity of it. To point your finger at one of the most respected journalists in the country and tell him what is wrong with the media. That moment of disappointment on his face, you could see it. Because he had given her every opportunity to handle this with grace, but she had chosen this path instead. When he said her reaction spoke volumes, those words landed hard. Because they were true, and everyone in that studio knew it. Everyone watching at home knew it. The shouting that came next, the actual shouting, on live television, that was the moment where any remaining credibility she had just evaporated. Because you cannot claim to be the reasonable one while you are shouting at someone who is calmly sitting there. When Anderson stood up, when he said they needed to end this interview, that was the moment of truth. He was not angry. He was not shouting. He was simply done. Done with the deflection. Done with the attacks. Done with the theatrics. He had given her multiple chances to engage in good faith, and she had refused every single one. So he did what needed to be done. The shock on her face. That genuine shock. She really thought she could behave that way without consequences. She really thought her status would protect her. When she said he could not just kick her off the show, you could hear the desperation creeping in. the realization that she had miscalculated, that she had pushed too far, but it was too late. And his response? Simple, direct, devastating. This is my show. I decide who sits in that chair. You need to leave. No anger, no emotion, just fact, just reality. The camera's capturing all of it, every moment, every word, every expression. That is the thing about live television. There is nowhere to hide, no editing. What happens, happens. And everyone sees it. His final response to her threat. Actually, it is over, at least for tonight. Goodbye. The finality of those words, the quiet authority, that is real power. The producer guiding her off stage. Even in this moment of high tension, the show maintained its standards. Maintained. Its professionalism. Those clicking heels in the silence, that sound will be remembered. It became the sound of entitlement meeting its match. The sound of consequences. And then Anderson turning to the camera, still composed, still professional, explaining to the audience what they had just witnessed. Not gloating, not celebrating, just explaining. That is leadership. That is what it looks like when someone makes a difficult call and then stands behind it without fanfare, without drama, just a clear explanation of why the decision was made. This moment will be studied. It will be used as an example of how to handle a difficult interview, how to maintain professional standards, how to hold people accountable without becoming confrontational. Anderson recognized that there was no path forward, so he ended it. That takes courage. That takes conviction. That takes a willingness to make the right call even when it is the hard call. This is what journalism should be, not gotcha moments. Not trying to make people look bad for entertainment, but asking important questions, giving people fair opportunities to answer, and maintaining standards when those opportunities are refused. That night, in that studio, under those bright lights, something important happened. Something that needed to happen. Someone with power was held accountable. Someone who expected deference received scrutiny instead. And someone who maintained their principles throughout it all showed the world what real journalism